Prohibition in the US was meant to rein in vice and excess.
Did it work?
No, it did not. Instead, it made for a time of lawlessness and violence like the country had never seen. Also, it was really easy to break out of jail in the 30s. A lot more on that later. So began the era of the public enemy. The FBI gained new powers, used innovative detection methods, and turned the little-known lawyer J. Edgar Hoover into the embodiment of federal justice.
Every shot hits the anatomy of that theoretical public enemy. He will kill and kidnap no more.
During the 1920s, Al Capone made a fortune and a name for himself from a string of illicit enterprises. You know all about his crimes, including bootlegging, drug running, and taking out anyone who stood in his way. But as he built up his criminal enterprise, Capone also helped the city's poor. He donated to charity and even opened one of the first soup kitchens in Chicago. This is why even today he's recalled as a sort of Robin Hood, but his assumed involvement in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, a headline-grabbing burst of gangland violence, made him public enemy number one.
He was never convicted of breaking the bootlegging laws, although he did it, thousands of times.
For years, the Bureau of Investigation, old BF, was seemingly powerless to stop Capone. He was jailed in 1929 for carrying a concealed weapon, released after 9 months, and jailed again in 1931 on contempt charges. He served 6 months. It was only when President Herbert Hoover overhauled federal criminal law, the courts, and prison systems that officials finally got the upper hand. In the end, it was a failure to pay income tax that put Capone behind bars in 1931. He died in 1947, only 48 years old. Frank Jelly Nash was a thief and safecracker with a 20-year criminal career. In 1922, Nash joined the Al Spencer Gang, robbing the Katy Limited postal train in Oklahoma the following year. He received a 25-year sentence but escaped in 1930. How, you ask? Well, someone let him run an errand and then he just kept running. Jails were different back then. More lawlessness followed because once you're a man on the run, why follow the rules? By 1933, Nash had wound up in Hot Springs, Arkansas. There, FBI agents Frank Smith and Francis Joe Lackey joined Police Chief Otto Reed to put him under arrest. All four boarded an overnight train bound for Union Station in Kansas City, Missouri. But several of Nash's friends had caught wind that he'd been picked up and set about planning his escape. On June 17th, at Union Station, 3 gunmen, identified, maybe incorrectly, by the FBI as Charles Pretty Boy Floyd, Vernon Miller, and Adam Ricchetti, opened fire, killing Nash and 4 lawmen. The 3 managed to get away, but things went south pretty quickly. In November, Miller's body was found near Detroit, Michigan. He'd been the victim of an alleged altercation with members of New Jersey's mob. In October the following year, Floyd and Ricchetti were involved in a shootout in Ohio. Floyd escaped that one, but was killed in another shootout 2 days later. Ricchetti was apprehended, convicted, and sentenced to death. He was executed in 1938. What became known as the Kansas City Massacre prompted Congress to pass laws beefing up the weapons carried by agents. And finally, J. Edgar Hoover's FBI could take the fight to members of organized crime. Hoover wasn't the sole driving force behind the FBI in its campaign against gangsters. Melvin Purvis, handpicked by Hoover to head the Chicago office, was a key player in the downfall of 3 public enemies in 1934: Pretty Boy Floyd, Babyface Nelson, and John Dillinger. Purvis wrote in his autobiography, American Agent, "There is probably no one whose career so graphically illustrates the inadequacies of our systems as does that of John Dillinger." Dillinger was in and out of trouble throughout his childhood, but at 21, he was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison for his role in a robbery gone wrong. The excessive sentence hardened him. Dillinger's parole in 1933 marked the beginning of an almost year-long spree of prison escapes, robberies, and killings. Though the general public loved Dillinger, his growing celebrity led to him getting plastic surgery in an attempt to go under the radar. He even tried, unsuccessfully, to get rid of his fingerprints. He had good reason to want to turn the heat down, being named America's public enemy number 1. The next month, Purvis and Special Agent Samuel P. Cowley, acting on information from a friend of Dillinger's then girlfriend, fatally ambushed him outside the Biograph Theater in Chicago. So, about that information, you've probably heard the legend of the Lady in Red, or Woman in Red, someone in red. Turns out, that's an accurate legend. She was known then as Anna Sage, a brothel owner who was after the reward for info about Dillinger. But here's the big twist. She wasn't wearing red, she wore orange. She only got half the reward money and then deported back to her home country of Romania a few years later. It's the most obvious nickname if you know the backstory. Chicago-born Lester Gillis was a seasoned car thief by the time he was 14, and that's why they called him Babyface Nelson. He soon moved on to robbing banks, and in 1931, while on trial for a bank heist, he escaped and fled to California. Again with the escapes. There he met John Paul Chase, and the two progressed to bootlegging. A couple years later, and they joined Dillinger and his gang, and Nelson quickly gained a reputation for being extremely violent. For the FBI, the fight against crime at the time was an uphill battle. Limited legal powers, qualified personnel, and weapons often gave criminals an edge. But the perfect storm of problems came in April 1934 with the Little Bohemia raid. It should have been Melvin Purvis's finest hour, capturing John Dillinger and his gang at the Little Bohemia Lodge in Wisconsin. When the lodge's owners realized who was there, they contacted the FBI, and a plan was hastily put into action. Unfortunately, that plan was chaotic and doomed. Unreliable vehicles, an isolated location in the snow, and darkness led to the team being split up, and the agents ended up targeting their own men. The gunfire alerted Dillinger and his gang, who managed to flee. Nelson made it to a nearby house and took 2 hostages. 2 agents and a local constable showed up shortly after, and Nelson opened fire, killing one of the men. He fled again, and a reward was issued for his capture.
The FBI set full sail after a kill-crazy gunman named Babyface Nelson.
By November, Nelson and Chase were heading out of Chicago when Special Agent Samuel P. Cowley was tipped off about their stolen vehicle. When the car was spotted in Barrington, Illinois, Cowley and Special Agent Herman Edward Hollis headed to the location. A gunfight ensued. Both lawmen eventually died, and Nelson was fatally wounded. He died that evening. Solid detective work is what first put the Bureau onto Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow in 1932. A prescription bottle found in a car the duo had stolen led the FBI to the couple and their gang. They had met in West Dallas in 1930, shortly before Barrow was jailed for burglary. Parker smuggled in a gun, helping Barrow out with a short-lived escape. He got sent back to jail and was released 2 years later. From there, Bonnie and Clyde, alongside their revolving door gang of bandits, embarked on a crime spree that included robbery, kidnapping, and murder. Unlike some of the era's criminals, the notoriously violent couple weren't well regarded by the public. They were closer to public nuisances, and by 1934, the net around them was tightening. They made headlines with a, you guessed it, jailbreak at Eastham Prison Farm, and afterward, the duo headed to Louisiana's Bienville Parish. Little did they know, a police ambush was lying in wait. Bonnie and Clyde's criminal careers ended in a fatal hail of bullets.
This is what happened to Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow in a battle with local officers.
Fred Barker was the youngest of 4 boys born to Arizona Ma Barker, a woman J. Edgar Hoover insisted in 1938 was the most vicious, dangerous, and resourceful criminal brain of the last decade.
She was a wicked woman. How can anybody raise their children to be criminals of that ilk?
Fred met Alvin Creepy Karpis while both were behind bars, and the two teamed up after their release to hold up banks, steal from trains, and commit murder across the Midwest. The nickname Creepy came from his smile, so yeah, checks out. Anyway, it was kidnapping that really made the Barker-Karpis Gang famous. In 1933, they held brewery president William Ham Jr. ransom for $100,000, and the following year,
kidnappers strike again.
They did indeed. They got twice that amount from millionaire Edward Bremer. The gang split up and went their separate ways, not realizing they had left behind evidence that would bring them down. Enter the Bureau's Technical Crime Laboratory. Founded in 1932 and driven by Special Agent Charles Appel and J. Edgar Hoover, it was expanding the field of forensics, including the use of fingerprints. Agents at the lab were able to take latent fingerprints from the ransom notes sent to Ham's family and connect them to members of the gang. When Arthur Doc Barker was arrested in Chicago on January 8, 1935, FBI agents found a map that led to the exact place where his younger brother Fred and Ma Barker were holed up, Lake Weir in Marion County, Florida. That's a little north of the Villages today, to give you an idea of where it was. Truly the middle of no place in the 1930s, it should have been the perfect place to hide if not for modern techniques used to track them down. A team led by Agent Earl Conley soon had the house with the Barkers inside surrounded, and around 5 a.m. on January 16th, the 6-hour gun battle began, during which as many as 1,500 rounds were fired. When it ended, both Fred and Ma Barker were dead. Karpis, who had his fingertips surgically removed to avoid detection, was arrested a year later. Many sources have claimed that George Machine Gun Kelly is responsible for coining the term G-Men.
I think he exclaimed once that, look out boys, the G's are coming.
But it's likely he never actually said any such thing. No matter the truth, the nickname stuck and G-Men was forever aimed at Bureau agents. Kelly was, in spite of his nickname, not especially violent. He didn't really like guns, and most of his criminal career was spent bootlegging. Bootlegging Kelly just doesn't really roll off the tongue like Machine Gun Kelly does. It wasn't until he met his wife, Catherine, that he started to make a name for himself, thanks mostly to her influence. In July 1933, he abducted oil tycoon Charles Urschel from his home at gunpoint. Urschel's wife called Hoover himself for help, but the Bureau wasn't going to make a move until after Urschel was released. That didn't mean there wasn't an investigation going on, though, and Kelly and his wife were in the spotlight almost from the start. Their cohorts in the kidnap scheme were quickly found, and by September, the Kellys had run out of luck. They were arrested in an early morning raid without a shot being fired. The pair were sentenced to life in prison the following month. Machine Gun Kelly died in prison in 1954, while Catherine was released in 1958 and died in 1985. The death of John Dillinger in 1934 didn't put an end to the public enemy era, at least not in Alfred Brady's mind. He, Clarence Lee Schaefer Jr., and James Dalhover pledged to make Dillinger look like a piker, or in modern-day terms, a small fry. And for several months between 1935 and April 1936, they fulfilled that vow. The trio were behind roughly 150 robberies and killed as many as 4 people, depending on the source. Despite their long list of crimes, the newly named Federal Bureau of Investigation couldn't intervene, since everything happened at a state level, until April 1936, that is. The Brady Gang, having robbed an Ohio jewelry store, crossed state lines into Indiana, allowing the FBI to step in. After a brief capture and, wait for it, subsequent escape in 1936, Brady and his men remained at large for months before making their way to Maine. They ended up in Bangor, where they'd heard they could buy guns, no questions asked. It didn't work out so well for them. The manager reported them to the police. But he didn't ask questions, so that part was still accurate. On October 12th, FBI agents were able to position themselves around the town. When the Brady Gang returned, a roughly 4-minute gunfight erupted that left all 3 members dead. Salvatore Lucania came to the United States at 10 years old. As a teenager, he changed his name to Charles Luciano, picking up the nickname Lucky from lifelong friend Meyer Lansky. In the early 1920s, Luciano worked as a gunman and eventually wound up with Arnold Rothstein's crew. When Rothstein was killed in 1928, Luciano set about taking power. He eventually became the acknowledged head of a sophisticated network of organized crime known as the Commission.
The Commission functioned as a board of directors, and it was their job to quell turf wars, to handle disputes.
In the 1930s, Luciano also controlled a vast, what they used to call prostitution ring. Although he focused on raking in profits, he was also attracting the attention of law enforcement. In 1936, New York Special Prosecutor Thomas E. Dewey, at the same A Future Dewey Defeats Truman fame, named Luciano Public Enemy No. 1 and launched a nationwide manhunt. Luciano was eventually tracked down to Hot Springs, Arkansas, where he was arrested and eventually extradited back to New York to face trial. Luciano was convicted on more than 60 charges of compulsory prostitution. He served 10 years before being deported to Italy, where he died in 1962.